guest now is Rodney Sampson, Dr. Rodney Sampson. Most of you may be familiar with him as the founder of OHUB, and OHUB's work that is very pioneering in developing culturally competent entrepreneurship programs. They've been doing this since 2013. He's also the author of Kingonomics. While that book is no longer in hard print, I believe the paperbacks are now available. But he's doing so much more, including helping to shape policy around financial opportunities of inclusion in the investment world. Why don't you join me in welcoming Rodney to the conversation now and allow him to share his sterling advice, his perspectives, and his knowledge? Rodney Sampson. Dr. Sampson, welcome back.
Janice, it's so good to see you.
Oh my goodness, you don't know how happy I am to see you. You've had so much going on. I feel as though I've been kind of shadowing your presence, but you were one of our first guests when I started to record this podcast 2 years ago.
I remember.
Thank you. Thank you for coming back.
Absolutely. It's definitely good to be back, and you're absolutely correct. We've been moving in what they call hyperspeed, trying to pace ourselves, but we're excited.
Well, for those of our family who are listening and want to know more about you, I'm inviting them right now to know that your last episode with us was episode number 9. And a lot has happened in the past 2 years. I know we've got a lot to discuss. Let's dive right in, okay?
Okay, absolutely.
All right. Now, this episode may come out in a couple of weeks, but just this week that we're recording, you were testifying before Congress. Tell us about that experience.
Absolutely. I've, had the privilege to serve in that capacity a few times over the last decade or so. And this particular committee is the Financial Services Committee. And this was the subcommittee on capital formation. And I was invited to talk about my experiences as a technology startup founder for over 2 decades, and an angel and venture fund investor as well. And so it was quite a spirited committee. It was a bipartisan spirit in the room, which, in these times can be quite, polarizing with people sticking to their parties, but everyone seemed to be on the same page of trying to figure out a way to redefine the definition of an accredited investor, someone who is qualified to understand the risks to invest in, our asset class, the startup ecosystem. And so there was spirited debate on whether that should be income-based, net worth-based, or professional proficiency. There are people who have, 10, 20, 30 years of domain expertise, but may not meet the income or net worth threshold, but should have the opportunity to generate wealth in an industry that they know and have helped to build. So it was an incredible experience. I was able to bring my family, my wife, and all but one of our children were able to attend. So it was an incredible experience. And next week, these bills actually go to vote in the House. And so there was already some negotiating. I tried to bridge, I work with both parties to get stuff done. And so I tried to bridge some stuff right there with some folks. And looks like, we've got good traction. So we'll see.
Well, as always with you, I'm refreshed and informed, I'm taught, and there's so much in what you just said. I'm delighted to hear, and as I already knew, that you do work across political aisles to take care of common good. And the depth of knowledge you have is so important. As if for some time now, Dr. Sampson, I have leaned in on the idea that we need to pay attention to how we defined countries is changing. Technology has allowed us to reconsider geography. I mean, whether it's about how you implement tax and who has domain over what occurs on the internet in exchanges, or the fact that basically rivers and land don't necessarily dictate how people travel any longer. So we are a
Absolutely.
little bit behind in our politics in how we treat things, even, whether or not we allow people to vote at certain hours or days, where our voter rules now are aligned with back when we were horse and buggy getting messages. So
Right.
you just bring so much intelligence to the picture that is, while high level thinking delivered from you to people who need to hear it in everyday language. That's a gift as well as an earned skill, an earned talent, an earned skill matched to a God-given talent, I should say, with you. Can you see yourself getting more involved in politics in the future?
You know, this is sort of on date night. We talk about this sometimes, like, what would it be like to run, for political office? But I think we have found sort of our sweet spot in policy formation, being able to actually, look at what's happening, look at the trends, bring information from respective communities that don't always have a voice or a seat at the table, and actually help, to shape policy. It's a little bit like writing code. You have a blank slate, and, Congress is the compiler if it's a federal construct, or if it's a county or even a municipal level, just understanding that, that process. So I do have an honor of serving as a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, based out of Washington, D.C. And this is my fourth appointment there. And it's an incredible experience. I don't spend a lot of time there, but they bring me in to talk about topics related to inclusive innovation, inclusive entrepreneurialism, investment, capital formation, all things the fourth industrial revolution. That's a term if you're taking notes right there. We are indeed moving quickly through the fourth industrial revolution. And so those type of topics I'm often called upon by Brookings, and we sit down with different representatives and senators, and even sometimes the White House. I'll give you a specific example. The recent CHIPS and Science Act, before it became known as CHIPS and Science Act, it was originally introduced as the Endless Frontier Act. And so you had it really came out of Democratic Party innovation. Congressman Ro Khanna, who's a dear friend, he is the representative for Silicon Valley. And then, of course, you got Schumer, you got Mark Warner, used to be in the House. And so the Endless Frontier Act was meant to form new regional technology hubs in areas of the country where there was not a lot of what we'll call innovation density, right? So like when you're in California and San Francisco or East Palo Alto or Silicon Valley, there's innovation density. If you're in Manhattan, innovation density, Boston, and now we're, Seattle, Austin, even Atlanta is now, Los Angeles, our innovation density is increasing. But if you look at the rest of America, it has lagged behind in so many ways. And so I had an opportunity to look at early drafts of the bill. And even though you hear language like, we want to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table and all Americans can participate, in the innovation economy, when you look at the actual words on the paper, I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't see it here. And so you have to be wise also how you move in those circles, because a lot of things that, in my space, I'm very unapologetically championing for Black founders and women founders. And sometimes when you're trying to create bipartisan policy that works for what everyone has to sign off on because they're representing certain constituents back home, you can't always use terms like racial equity. So I'll give you an example of what we did. So Regional Tech Hubs is a $10+ billion allocation in chips. And so I was able to help shape the code whereby at least 2 of the regional tech hubs have to be in regions that have a geographical region that has a density of historically Black colleges and universities, right? Well, we know, there are only a few cities like Atlanta. We have several, New Orleans, Houston, the Raleigh-Durham area, and Washington.
I was going to ask, how did North Carolina A&T fare in that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So, because you got several HBCUs, in that region in North Carolina, and so when this piece of legislation, it's now passed, it's federal law, and it's going to live. Part of it will live in the Commerce Department, and the Economic Development Administration will oversee this budget. Open proposals. Now you can have coalitions from those cities, and at least 2 of them have to be in regions that have a high density of minority serving institutions, which of course includes historically Black colleges and universities. It also includes community colleges and technical colleges as well. So I've learned over time.
There is a school, Cal State out here, San Bernardino,
yes,
that is also a minority serving institution, and it likely will fit into your bill. While it does not have a density of same such schools,
sure,
it's a density in population, and people who attend that school typically continue to live there. So it has a high minority population.
Absolutely. So that piece of legislation was written specifically to make sure that Black and brown folks in this country can participate and be beneficiaries of said legislation. And so that's just one example of a piece of legislation. There are about 4 of them at the federal level, going back to the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act. And we got involved in 2010, and this was a grassroots effort to allow everyday Americans who may not be affluent or wealthy or high net worth to invest in startups through equity crowdfunding portals. And so that now, was
this in follow through to the legislation that President Obama did in the Jobs Act.
Absolutely. So President
Maybe
Obama.
You can explain a little bit about that act, because that also received a lot of support across the aisle in order to happen, even though it was heavily lobbied for. I shouldn't use the word lobbied when you're talking politics, but it was heavily urged for by people who come from Democratic leaning communities.
Absolutely. I'll give you a little background story. So he was a junior congressman at the time. Patrick McHenry was approached by some angel investors and sort of a coalition of entrepreneurs to help modernize the Securities and Exchange Commission laws, which had been written and implemented and enforced in the 1940s as a response to the Great Depression. A lot of people, a lot of companies lost wealth and went out of business, of course, in the Great Depression. And so the United States government says we've got to regulate investment in this country. Well, those securities laws have not really been modernized since the 1940s. And so this was really a first attempt at modernizing the space we call private equity or private securities, which venture capital and angel investing is a part of that. It's a small part of that. But if you think about it, 3% of the capital markets are venture capital, which is roughly about $200 to $300 billion annually. That money is responsible for about 2/3 of our net new jobs in this country and 24% of our GDP. So theoretically, if you increase the amount of money that's going into these edge technology startups, and people may say they're very risky and most of them fail. Well, as investors, we understand that. We understand the risk of investing in early stage companies. But the case that was made, and I think it resonated.
Make the point really quickly, please.
Yes.
Many fail without losing money. People think failure means loss of money. Sometimes failure means they stop.
Yeah, absolutely. They stopped. They didn't maybe get traction, or they're just a myriad of reasons. And I remember sitting in the SEC having this conversation, and I came up with a hashtag. I said, failure is not fraud. Just because I fail at something, that just does not mean there was anything criminal or fraudulent. Businesses wind down for so many different reasons, every day. But the thing that really resonated with, and this is kind of an oxymoron, the conservative investment theories of the Democratic Party. Yeah, I kind of mixed that in there.
Yes, yeah.
Because there's a lot of consumer protection, investor protection.
What you're talking about is highly nonpartisan and has to be.
Absolutely. So what resonated across the aisle was that even though a lot of these early stage these companies may not make it long term, maybe not past the 2, 5, or 10-year point, guess what? They are employing Americans in the meantime. Yes. And they're helping people to get critical skills. We see this all the time. A company doesn't make it, they may have 6 months of runway left and they get acquired. Mm-hmm. And then that entire team may go inside of a larger company. And guess what? Now they have an entire new business unit and they picked up perhaps some new technology and skills. But back to the point. So Patrick McHenry ended up sponsoring the bill, and it was getting traction, but it wasn't going to pass without the Democratic support, because at the time, the Dems had both houses. And so we had the White House and we had Congress. And so I had a conversation, with the dear, esteemed gentlelady from California, Maxine Waters, about supporting the bill. And
Maxine chaired the finance committee for a while, didn't she?
She sure did. And what's interesting, the new chair is actually Patrick McHenry, who was a junior congressman at the time and is now considered, to be, senior. Has been there for a decade. And so we were able to bridge, I jokingly say, the Patriot Party, because Patrick McHenry was a Tea Party patriot, mm-hmm. Republican. And I jokingly, in our conversations would say we bought the Tea Party and the Coffee Party together. And so that was a very critical moment in helping the legislation to get support. But what got it across the finish line was the Obama White House and the Speaker of the House at the time came together. They renamed the bill to include jobs.
Right.
And when they did that,
the jobs, the career.
Yeah. So the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act, the acronym of jobs, everyone was like, well, of course, who's going to vote against jobs, right? And so what that piece of legislation did, it did a few things. And, when you look at policy, and those of you who are listening and say, oh my God, I vote and I campaign and I give, but you can get involved at the local level, state and federal level, and making your voice and your ideas known in terms of shaping or reshaping policy. And so these bills have different titles. You know, the acts may have Title I, Title II, Title III. And so Title I made it possible, you know, for, you might have heard of platforms like AngelList, you know, actually that was Title II. Title I, you know, created sort of like this emerging growth area to like really accelerate IPOs. You know, there's data that shows IPOs, 90%, Janice, of a company's growth is post-IPO because they're able to receive so much, you know, new capital, and they're able to grow exponentially. But the title that we were all really excited about was Title III, which is called regulation crowdfunding. And this new regulation allowed any startup, any small business to go to one of the approved platforms that's governed by FINRA, which is one of our financial regulatory associations. It's actually the only financial association, regulatory association in our country. And FINRA approves these portals, and you could go on and you can look at startups and you can say, oh, I want to invest $100. I want to invest $250, right? And, you know, I made a comment yesterday and I said, when I was asked a question by the chair of the Financial Services Committee about the importance of creating a new class of angel investors and venture investors. They were really intrigued by the work we did with the Links Incorporated at the national level and how we taken more than 50 high net worth Black women through our investment certificate program. And now they are investing. And so we're seeing new capital at the table.
For our family, what is in US dollars considered the floor of high net worth?
Sure. So, well, the Securities and Exchange Commission defines an accredited investor as an individual that generates at least $200,000 in income or $300,000 as a couple for at least 2 years, and they expect to do it in the future.
I just want to make sure our family understands that majority of people listening right now fit the profile.
Absolutely. So there's the income criteria, or you can have a net worth of at least $1 million.
Right.
And that net worth cannot include your personal residence. So it can include your business, any stocks and bonds you may have, life insurance policies.
If you don't live on the farm that grandpa left.
Exactly.
But it's yours. You're paying tax on it.
Exactly. And what this bill allowed was for people who are not considered to be accredited investors. Now, yesterday, one of the pieces of legislation that actually has a lot of bipartisan support, particularly from Ranking Member Waters, is an amendment to the accredited investor definition, whereby you could take an exam from FINRA. Now, the Democrats want the exam to be administered by the SEC, and the Republicans want the exam to be administered by FINRA.
FINRA stands for.
Oh, you know what? You're going to get me now because I can't remember this acronym.
It does, but FINRA does. They can Google it, but tell them what
FINRA basically is a quasi-government organization that regulates or helps to regulate all securities. And I'll tell you what a security is. Security is a debt or equity investment. A loan is considered to be a security. A stock, a bond, those are all considered to be forms of securities. The SEC establishes policy, and FINRA helps to regulate. And I think the R is for regulatory authority.
The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority.
Absolutely.
FINRA.
Absolutely.
The federal level of regulation around the industry.
Absolutely. So whether it is FINRA or the SEC, I work with both of them. I got an interesting question from the gentleman from Texas, Congressman Sessions, yesterday. He said, "Don't you think the SEC, just yada yada yada?" And he pointed the question at me because he know of my political background. And I said, well, I work very well with the SEC. I think balance is the key. We have to work with all of these federal regulatory and policy, enforcement organizations. But at the end of the day, I'm excited that potentially the definition may be amended to include some type of exam that we can train people and teach people to prepare for. Because guess what? I'm gonna give you an example. Let's say your industry is, I don't know, people, right? Talent. You know a little bit about that.
Yes.
And your industry is being disrupted by software, right? Artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing. And so there's a whole industry that is, an ecosystem within an ecosystem, a community within a community that is creating technology to automate different systems. Some promise to remove bias in the hiring process. Some promise to help automate getting set up for benefits. And we've seen companies like Gusto and TriNet and Deal, to step into the space and do that. Well, imagine if you are very experienced in human resources and you go and work for one of these companies that ends up raising hundreds of millions of dollars of venture capital. Now, you have a job and, they may give you a few shares that vest over time, but what if you could have invested $1,000 in the seed round, $5,000 in the Series A, but because you're not, an accredited investor, maybe your salary is $150,000, maybe your net worth is $650,000, right? We see home values decreasing in some areas, and so sometimes forces. Absolutely.
I think recently I saw a map, Rodney, within the last week or so, where the values of homes along the West Coast have decreased from 1 to 10%, sweet spot being about 4.5 to 6%, with that incremental number of increase in home value along the East Coast. So, I don't know that will stand a long time, but it is representative of where you're speaking from.
Absolutely. So those are outside forces, that you may not be able to control. And so I don't think you should be restricted from being considered to be sophisticated enough to understand the risk that you are taking. And, I broke it down very clearly in part of my testimony that when we're talking to new investors, we only encourage them, honestly, in the early days, only invest what you're willing to lose. Mm-hmm. I don't care how much diligence you do, stellar team, great product, amazing traction, you name it, multi-billion-dollar market, and there's just some things that you can't control. And so when you start to simplify it, and one of the things I had to make sure that the body understood yesterday, particularly our Democratic colleagues, was that when we are defining women and we are defining the intersectionality of women and maybe their ethnic background, so a Black woman or an immigrant woman or a Hispanic woman, that doesn't automatically mean that we're talking about people who are welfare queens. It's just amazing that they always, and it's not everybody, but it was kind of alluded to like, well, maybe we could make sure, folks had all of their bills paid first before they invested. And I was like, wait, you really want to get into people's, like, how do you even regulate that? So I'm now submitting you my bank statements, so some of that kind of, just rhetorical
And how
stuff
do you find all of their bills? Because there are some very high net worth people who
that
don't pay
have,
for their bills.
right, exactly. So the consensus with those who were participating on the hearing was like, we need simple amendments that could move fast and make a difference. Because here's the key. When you look at America and you look at the global innovative competitiveness of our nation, and whether you like it or not, most of us probably listening are Americans. We have our unique set of challenges, systemic challenges and challenges that have been
And many
plaguing us.
listening are most are Americans, but a significant number who are listening are also European and African nation people too.
Absolutely. Well, this is definitely
South American
contextual.
people who are listening. So what you're describing as a United States experience through Congress can be replicated or shadowed by many of our family who live across the globe, and it's good to pay attention to it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and this is really contextual because when I've looked at securities laws, particularly in France and Spain, where we own businesses, and of course the UK, but definitely on the continent of Africa as well, where we've done business, you have to be in tune with the regulatory environments, especially when money is moving, right?
Yes.
So this is very contextual to those that are listening. And so at the end of the day, in yesterday's context, they were talking about, American global competitiveness. And one of the ways to ensure that is to make sure that the capital markets are flowing so that innovators who have brilliant ideas and dreams can continue to raise capital. Now, when you double click on that and look at the data for Black founders in particular that are raising venture capital, first of all, the venture capital industry, Janice, is maybe 60 years old. It's a venture capital is about as, old as civil rights in America. When you look at
than I am, let's put it that way.
Okay, there you go. And in the last 20 years, there have only been 1,000 Black and Hispanic founders that have raised over $1 million in venture capital. Now, I was one of the first 20 years ago. I was the first in the Southeast with multicast and streaming faith. We'll talk a little bit about that at some point. And there were two others, Omar Wassel with blackplanet.com. Some people may remember Black Planet.
Yeah.
Don't tell on yourself if you had a Black Planet profile. And then Image Cafe, which was my friend Clarence Wooten. All three of those companies were successfully acquired by the way. But from that era to present, only 1,000 Black and brown founders have raised over $1 million in venture capital. When you juxtapose that to National Venture Capital Association and PitchBook data, in 2021, there were 15,000 deals done. In 2022, 15,000, just in those 2 years. So look at 30,000 deals in 2 years compared to 1,000 in 20 years, right? And so it's a little bit shameful that we have not figured out how to drive more capital to overlooked and underestimated and underinvested communities.
Well, this is a fascinating discussion, Dr. Sampson, and I enjoy saying Dr. Sampson.
I want to say, Janice, call me Rodney, please.
I do, but I have to throw it in a little bit because you've earned so much credibility as you speak forward, and it's important for people to remember that you're not always expressing just opinion. Sometimes you're expressing data, knowledge, fact. But to that point, It's important for our family to think about what you're saying, because you're talking about multiple ways to be owners, owners as investors,
Absolutely.
as well as owners as founders and innovators who are seeking investment. I'm going to, shortly after we complete our conversation, reach out to you, and perchance there's an opportunity for you to participate in something that I'm very excited about. We ran our first season, which was a pilot season of a show called America's Real Deal. And America's
Oh,
Real
wow.
Deal actually is possible because of that Jobs Act that you spoke to
Sure.
during the Obama administration, which allows people to invest in the way they can. So we're a highly digitized platform that you may be interested in, and we're about to film season 2. I may invite you to be a part of that. You
Oh,
spoke
definitely.
about going to
Definitely.
DC and testifying before Congress and taking your family with you. You know, you're a beautiful, accomplished wife, Shantari, who I just admire so much. How is our First Lady doing? And how are the kids?
She's doing well, incredible. And we have been moving around a lot together because that is one of the ways we get our business done together as well, operating multiple businesses and, our investment portfolio and raising a family. I had the opportunity to brag on our children a little bit yesterday. Our oldest daughter, Princess, she graduated from Spelman last year. You know, magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa in computer science, and she started her PhD program at the University of Pennsylvania in computer science. So she's now in Philadelphia. We're super proud of Princess. And you may know this, all my boys have my name. So Rodney the second, Rodney the third,
Yes.
Rodney the fourth, and Rodney
You
the
and
fifth. So
George
we have
Foreman
6
are the only
children.
men I know who have
Yeah.
the children named for
Yeah.
them, each of them.
Yeah. So Rodney the second graduated from Morehouse as well. He caught up with his sister. They're 2 years apart, but he caught up with Princess and they graduated the same year in computer science as well. Magna cum laude, honors, Phi Beta Kappa. He's starting graduate school at Georgia Tech in the fall. And he also pledged the same fraternity I pledged. I'm a 31-year member of Omega Psi Phi. And he pledged. Yeah. He pledged Spring 22, 30 years apart. So incredibly proud of Rodney the second. Rodney the third is a film and theater major at Morehouse. He's in his junior year, just secured his first summer internship. He's going to Harvard Publishing in Boston for the fall. And then Rodney the fourth, he just turned 17, but he started college at 16, and he's at Morris Brown. They got their accreditation back, and so reached out to the president and said, you know what, you got your accreditation back. I'm going to put one of my boys over there if you'll have him. And I said, he's young.
So much faith in the HBCU system. You're
absolutely,
us.
absolutely.
Find our family.
And so he's a computer scientist and software engineer in his own right, because all of them have gone through the OHUB upskilling programs, the boot camps and the certificates. So they get to college already having an employable skill and already have completed our entrepreneurship programming. So they approach life a little bit different and learning differently, because they're going in understanding that this is about lifetime learning and that they will learn and get credentials for the rest of their life. Like, it's not just 4 years or 8 years. And then the youngest two, they're still at home learning, gaming, and just, having fun. They travel with us as well. So we are, people ask us how we do it. By the grace of God is how we are able to continue, to wear these multiple hats. But everything we do, for our living legacies and for our children's children.
I just love it, Rodney, because you and Shantaria are teaching your children life skills. You're also teaching them community gifting in the
Yes.
way that they are working, and they are. I won't go into that right now because I was actually going to ask you how the kids reckon with being children of two highly accomplished and community committed parents. But you've leaned in on that. I will ask you this though.
Yeah.
Is it okay for us to speak about it just now? The new online platform of OHUB? I mean, regardless of your launching technicalities, and
Sure.
please share with us your vision and path forward so our family listening know what they can join and what to expect.
Absolutely. So we are in beta with our product at OHUB, and I'll give you some context. So we launched Opportunity Hub. We call it OHUB for short. 10 years ago. The mission was to really make it a little easier for people that look like us or come from similar backgrounds to find their way in the what we then call the innovation economy, and then we call the fourth industrial revolution. So, we've helped thousands of college students and adults get their first careers in tech. Very, very, really proud of that. I've had folks to send us emails and DMs saying, look, I was about to give up and then I heard about OHUB and I came through your program, or, um, you know, I was in poverty. I didn't even know what poverty was. I didn't know what wealth was until, I attended an OHUB meetup or workshop at a city, and someone defined what wealth was. And I realized that I had a negative net worth. And so I worked, and now I have a positive net worth. And so we have countless stories like that. We really started off as a place-based strategy here in Atlanta, with the technology hub, sort of like the co-working model. We were affectionately called the Black WeWork in town. We didn't have WeWork money, but we still made a name for ourselves of creating a safe space for anyone to be able to come and work on an idea. And then we added our programs, and that's when we really started to take off. The program that you have participated many times, we operated that program for 7 years. I really want to bring it back. We sort of winded it, down during the pandemic.
Let's do
But
it together. Let's do it together.
you know what? Let's do it. That HBCU at South by Southwest
Yes.
was,
Remember that with so much affection and
yes,
so much success. Rodney, you're always at work on
yeah,
so many different projects. What are you
yeah,
most excited about right now outside of your own projects, and
yeah.
particularly in technology that you hear about? What's most exciting for you?
Well, there are two things that, one, I want to finish telling you about OHUB's new products. So places, programs, now products. What we realized about 2 years ago as we were, coming through the pandemic was that we were sitting on a lot of video content, from all of our different events and conferences and trade shows. You're a part of a lot of that experience, but we really, really ramped up at the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. We started doing daily masterclasses. And so we've now accumulated several hundred hours of content, and we're going to organize that content in a library and make it available, sort of like, Netflix or Hulu for tech, right? Or for startups or for investment. And we're going to house it inside of a new mobile app. It's already released in beta. It's free to download. And it's sort of like Instagram meets Slack a little bit, but it's just, if you just search OHUB in the apps, your app store, or on the web, ecosystemapp.com, and you download it for free, create a profile, and start connecting with other like-minded people, right? And we'll soon start introducing our subscription programs for people who want to get access to our library of content, which can really help accelerate you and fast forward you into this fourth industrial revolution. And we're going to have partnerships for employers. We just really want to productize our work for scale. What's also interesting at OHUB, and then I'll shift gears a little bit, is we have now started to tap into federal funding. And so our foundation was awarded a multi-million-dollar subaward to launch in New Orleans,
I learned about
Louisiana.
that. I learned
Yes, yes. We're gonna have to get you down and do a book sign and do all of it. Maybe do an essence or something. We have to figure that out. But we're really,
do a masterclass series, you and I together. So,
yes.
make sure you speak about your interest to that, because we're going to do a masterclass series, you and I.
Yeah, I'm down for it. Let's definitely do it. So that's all things, OHUB, of course, with the New Orleans project, we'll be making investments, at least $500,000 a year into some startups there, really, really early stage, new energy, climate tech, hydrogen, which is really important to that area. So that's the OHUB world. The team is growing. We're really excited. We've actually had a few offers from folks to acquire us or merge. So we're entertaining it. We'll see. But we're really focused on growth for the next decade. What's also exciting, Janice, is I alluded earlier about my first technology startup, now 23 years ago this May. We were pioneers in the invention and creation of what became known as linear streaming, which was 24/7 continuous playback of audio and video, almost like the ability to have your own 24/7 TV network without having to spend millions of dollars on, the equipment and the satellites that, make a broadcast station or network operate on a daily basis. And so that company was called Multicast, and we had a wholly owned subsidiary called Streaming Faith. We were the first to live stream services on the internet. And I remember our very first live stream was the homegoing service of Reverend Hosea Williams, who was a stalwart in the civil rights movement, along with Dr. Martin Luther King. And that was at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Our second live stream was Woman, Thou Art Loosed. Bishop T.D. Jakes, Woman, Thou Art Loosed was in Atlanta at the Georgia Dome. And we live streamed.
I'm about to attend the ILS in a couple of weeks, a few weeks.
Yes.
Now.
Oh, yes. That's coming up. I saw that.
I'm looking forward to seeing you.
Absolutely. You know what? We're going to look at a day to see if we can pop down. Because I know Bishop is doing this entrepreneurship thing now. I saw the launch of that in Black Enterprise. So I think we've got some, you got to look for what we call it in the startup world, product market fit. You got to look for that synergy, right? And when that fit happens. But, what's interesting about that business, we sold it in 2010. That's where I learned about venture capital. That's where I learned about corporate governance. That's where I learned about how technology works. I saw code come to life. I saw sales teams come together. I saw marketing happen. I saw difficulty, but I also saw success. And that's when I also learned what it meant to sell a business and what it meant to create multi-generational wealth with no reliance on pre-existing multi-generational wealth.
I love how you switch between the tech and the and wealth creation, which they basically are the same stream right now in so many ways.
Absolutely.
And without bastardizing the science behind it or going too deeply into detail, right now there's a big conversation on two things. Chat GPT, people are very concerned about, generative pre-trained transformer.
Right.
And then there's also concern, I think as recent as this morning, as late as this morning, people were still expressing concern about how if you own an iPhone, having it being hacked and stolen from you taking your information away by your identifiers that you have. So you can go in and you can put a particular identifier in there, and they can go in and they can hack that and then use it. So I think that as you talk, it's really important to speak to those aspects, because those are things that don't just hit big companies. They're hitting people's whole individual lives.
Oh, absolutely. I have the privilege of serving on the advisory board of Black in AI,
Yeah.
which is a global association of Black researchers at the PhD level, the master's level, the practitioner level, and AI for All, which touches students as well and introduces them to career pathways in artificial intelligence. But make no mistake about it, the capital markets exist to drive shareholder value. And if I can increase revenue while decreasing expenses, liability, and risk, boards and shareholders are going to do it. Now,
you've been promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the tech and startup world for a very long time.
yes.
Let me ask you something as you seek to complete that thought. A couple of things. One, what motivated you to become an advocate for underrepresented communities in this field, in these fields, really? And two, going back a little bit further, what attracted you to tech in the first place, Rodney?
Well, I'll answer the first question. So I was 10. We're going way back, and I'm going to keep this short. And some of us remember here in the United States when Sears, Roebuck used to send out that Christmas catalog. And I remember just flipping through the pages and, you used to circle everything you thought you wanted for Christmas. You didn't get most of it. You might get one thing or two things. I circled a computer one year, and my mom and grandparents got me that computer. And I started self-teaching myself to code. And I was just so fascinated with being able to type on a computer and watch it do what I said. You know how some folks have control management issues, and I'm like, well, I can't control people, but I can control this device right here. And so that was very, very fascinating to me, and I held on to that. Now, when I got to undergraduate, I didn't really study computer science. I had a computer that I actually had built. And I had a whole setup because we used to throw, the frat parties and other parties. And then I used to do all the flyers on campus. I was very entrepreneurial even back then. And so I just held on to that. And then, I had to make a decision after medical school where I had lost this passion for, wanting to practice medicine. I gotten involved more in ministry. I grew up in a family of ministers, 4 pastors, uncles that pastor. My mom was licensed and ordained. And so I grew up in the church as a musician as well. And so that was a part of me. I started being attracted to more of that. And I made the decision that I'm going to move back to Atlanta and I'm going to figure it out. And I ended up taking a job I did a workshop and a gospel concert at Mount Carmel Baptist Church. What's interesting is in Steve Case's new book, he chronicled, I don't know where Steve got this information because he didn't talk to me. We're good friends, but he didn't talk to me. His team didn't talk to me. And they have a really good, accurate backstory on sort of like my tech founder origination story, right? And I was operating the day-to-day operations of this church, and they were spending all of this money on BET, the Word Network, all these TV stations. It was hard to keep up. And I just kind of popped up one day and said, I saw this press release where Mark Cuban had sold broadcast.com for billions of dollars. And he was using this thing called multicasting technology. And I was just, researching and fascinated. And I was like, what if we could use that same
company 2 years ago, didn't you?
We sure did. We reacquired the company we started.
Co-founded it 2 decades ago.
Yes.
And bought it 2 years ago. Because you've been involved in venture capital investing for over 20 years.
Yeah,
You know what? That's fascinating in itself. I want you to talk about that. Can you interweave a little bit about how do you identify potential investment opportunities, Rodney? What qualities
sure.
do you look for in these startup founders? Some of them are listening to you right now.
Absolutely. Just to quickly finish the last thought, by re-owning this company, I felt like a generation had passed, and a lot of young people who look like you and I didn't have different role models. And I wanted them to see folks like yourself, first Black woman to build $1 billion company from the ground up. They don't have to think about entertainers. It's okay, right, to think about entertainers and athletes, but not as the only path to billions. And if they knew about people like you, and if they knew about the potential that even Emmett McHenry had with network solutions, right? And being the father of domain names. And I felt like we were at a, kind of a tipping point that Black people in America and around the world, people of color in particular, if they could see more Black technologists, if they could see more Black venture capitalists, and what better way to do it than actually to own the software company. So a market opportunity presented itself. We ended up reacquiring what is now called Pixel, Pixel, Pixel Technology Corporation. And we now own Stream of Faith again. And we've relaunched it. And we have offices of Pixel in Madrid, Grenoble, France, which is about 4 hours from Paris, and of course here in Atlanta. And so my wife and I had to put on our investment hat to even reacquire our own company, right? And, the first thing we looked at was the product. Was there an actual operating product? Now, some investors like ideas, right? They've got really, really long money. They'll bet on folks that have an idea to then go and build the product. Well, our money is not super, super long. It's long enough to do what we need to do. But we like to invest in folks who are like, they got the product, they're in market, they got customers, so they've got some market fit, because when you just got an idea, you don't know if you should sell the product for $2 or $2,000 because you haven't talked to enough customers, target customers, not your family and friends, but you got to talk to your target customer to tell you this. And so that's one of the things that we look for is product. We also look at team as well. I'm interested in understanding, do you have the domain expertise and the ability to execute on, get this, not the plan. I don't too much care about the plan. In the early stages where we invest, can you execute on building the product and selling the product to a few customers? And can you get the company to the point? And this is what I really look for, that grit in the founders that we invest in. Some founders have learned to play the investment game. I'm going to raise 1 million. That's going to last us 18 months. Then we're going to come back and raise 10 million, and that's going to take us another 18 months. And then we're going to raise 30 million. And some of them play that game and they build up a company. They never really generate revenue or that much revenue. And then, somebody comes along and says, I want to buy you. Well, I'm a little old school because before we were able to successfully raise venture capital, I had already put $2 million in recurring revenue on the board in this company in the first year and a half. So I'm always interested in, tell me about your sales plan. How are you going to get your customers, right? And then once we can get past product and really team and sort of go to market, then we're kind of putting together like the deal. We play sometimes two roles. Sometimes we're that first $25,000 or $50,000 in, and then sometimes you got your seed or your Series A close, and everybody else has already done all the fancy due diligence, but we know we can bring a little value, and so we'll come and close you out, right? And what I just explained in this process is every investor has an investor playbook or an investment thesis on how you construct your portfolio. Even if you're investing 1,000, 10, 100,000, a million, or $10 million, you have an investment thesis. And once you commit to that thesis, you stick with it. Like, for instance, I'm very, very good at investing in enterprise software companies because I built a company that sold to enterprises and other businesses, whether it was a church or whether, like today, our largest customer is Delta Airlines, or our largest international customer is Alstom, or Air France, and Airbus, or we have a big Japanese customer. So we know how to sell to enterprises, and I understand that supply chain and also the inner workings of a company and how to build relationships at all levels. Well, I like that. Go ahead.
Rodney, and I will refer to the Dr. Rodney here, Kingonomics came out over 10 years ago. Can you believe that? And
yes.
For those of you listening who aren't familiar with his book, I'm going to ask him right now to explain what Kingonomics is. And Rodney, share with them whether you think it's even more relevant today in light of the conversation you've just had.
Oh, my goodness. I think about that. This is not only the 10-year anniversary coming up of OHUB, but it's also the 10-year anniversary of Kingonomics, 12 innovative currencies for transforming your business and life, inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's on Audible. The hard copy is out of print, but there was a recent release of the paperback is out now. Most people are running.
We're sharing within this content how to get the book.
Absolutely.
Talk about those principles very quickly.
Sure. So what we did was we redefined what currency was. Because if you're talking to communities that don't have a lot of currency, you can talk about investing until you're blue in the face. If they don't have the money to do it, then they're not going to be able to do it. But I've seen venture capitalists go to people with money and get them to trust them with money so that they then will have money to invest. And if they are successful, they get a percentage of that long term. My point is, and I just defined what we define in the book as the currency of connectivity. You can connect your way to wealth in some instances. Your innovation.
For years, many members of the Jewish community have splendidly done this and transparently done this.
Yes.
And are a great example of this.
Absolutely. They're definitely just throughout antiquity, even to modern day, where certain communities have almost mastered the currency of connectivity.
Yes.
And also other currencies we define like courage. That's something, if you come from a background where you didn't have much, but you had the grit and the perseverance and the courage to go into spaces where you might have been the only one until you can open up the door and bring other folks with you.
Very basically speaking.
Yes.
And dynamically so. I've taught university students and some adults that voting is perhaps one of your strongest currencies.
It absolutely is.
Stronger than your dollar. And whether you vote one way or the other way, whether you vote north or south, right or left, however you vote, it is one of your strongest currencies, understanding the dynamics of mobility.
Absolutely. So these intangible currencies, and this, Kingonomics resonated a lot with the church in its early days because, they would often say, so it is, in heaven or the spirit, so it is in the physical on earth. And what we basically defined as currency is anything that flows, right? Electricity flows. It has a purpose. Water flows. The blood in your body flows, oxygen flows. And these intangible moving currencies are things that you absolutely cannot do without. I mean, imagine not having oxygen or blood or water, right? Or electricity. And so there have been entire industrial revolutions that have been created around these currencies that flow, tangible and intangible, which is why now information and the artificial acceleration of intelligence, because AI is still artificial intelligence, it's not intelligent, but because there's becoming a dependency on AI, it's going to impact the individual, perhaps at the level of income. But I would not be dismayed or, fearful about it, because we're at the ground level where you can take the skills you have and transfer those skills into cyber, new energy, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, health technology, nanotechnology. So don't be afraid when you hear these terms. Embrace them, because even in the technology world, for every software company, for every great engineer, there's got to be a great salesperson.
That's a perfect place to finish a conversation before we go to 4 for 4. It's also a perfect segue point to have you come back and continue this discussion. There's so much more I want to ask you. Right now, we're going to go for 4 for 4 if you're ready. You think you're ready to play 4 for 4? You already know how this goes. You played it before. I'm going to ask you 4 questions. You'll give me 4 answers to each of them. There are no right or wrong answers. And the first question, going 1 for 4, is, Rodney, you get to invite 4 people to dinner anytime from the past to present. Actual people now. We're not talking about artificially created presence, okay? Who's at your dinner and why?
Well, my wife will be with me. Napoleon Hill. His
Think and
book,
Grow Rich.
Think and Grow Rich, but his other work, Outwitting the Devil. That's the whole conversation. Yes. If you read Outwitting the Devil, where he really speaks to definitive purpose. Barack Obama.
3 people.
Barack Obama. And then give me anyone, maybe it's Mensa, any one of the kings of African antiquity. Give Cleopatra.
Beautiful.
You talk about connecting those dots. That I think that would be an incredible dinner.
Wow. Well, you know what? I'm going to come too. I'll give you 5.
Absolutely.
It has to be me. Hey, listen, let's go 2 for 4. What music are you listening to right now? Not podcasts, music, and why?
I'm listening a lot to gospel music, and rap music. And I'll tell you who I'm listening to. I'm listening to Outkast, because of their Atlanta roots. Infamous word, the South got something to say. That's how it was said. The South got something to say. And I think, the South does have something to say in terms of technology and what's happening in Atlanta, particularly Black tech in Atlanta. I would go on record as saying that Black tech from a national perspective really launched in Atlanta and now it's spreading nationwide. And I had an opportunity to be at the ground level of that. And then on the gospel side, I've always been a fan of Commissioned, and I know them personally, and they were the disruptors in an era when, the Winans came through, Commission came through. They sort of had that Detroit sound. And so I love traditional gospel. Of course, I grew up playing, piano and organ in the church, but commission brought a sound, a technology sound, because they were using the keyboards that had MIDI. And so I was intrigued with the devices they were using. And so I could take any commissioned album and just play it nonstop while I'm working, while I'm traveling, and then I can switch it right over to my Outcast.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. Let's go 3 for 4. What 4 books do you recommend to our family that they read, and why?
Well, first and foremost, I'm going to recommend Kingonomics to give you, really a foundational and sort of philosophical thesis for the work we do, but also how to ensure that everyone everywhere is equitably included in this fourth industrial revolution, this innovation economy. And the fact that it also will give you some insight into the thinking of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think is important as well, particularly if you are outside of the United States and you want to see a different perspective of King. We write about King during his final years, after civil rights, after voting rights, which actually those 2 pieces of legislation had a lot of immigrant rights tied to it that a lot of people may not realize, right? And so, but between that time and his death, he was focused on economic rights. And so he wrote Chaos or Community, Where Do We Go From Here? And so Kingonomics kind of picks up from Chaos or Community. So that's, book number 1. Number 2, I'm going to say pick your favorite John Maxwell book. Maybe The Irrefutable Laws of, Leadership or Trust. Any of those books are going to be incredible. So I'm going to recommend a genre of books from one author there. I would say next, from a technical
perspective. And the T.D. Jakes as well.
I was going to include, from a spiritual perspective, I've always appreciated Bishop Jakes' approach to talk at the intersection of culture and faith, and to make it relevant to different audiences. And it's amazing. I go back to watching, remember the live stream from Woman Thou Art Loosed, and you can be there as a man and still receiving a message that was meant for a woman. And it's so transcending. And so I appreciate that. And then finally, from a technical perspective, Venture Deals by my dear friend Brad Feld. If you really, really want to learn about investing in this asset class, Brad Feld, who is an incredible entrepreneur, incredible founder, was the founder of one of the world's largest startup accelerators. Brad's works are incredible as well. And he's also been a pioneer. He calls me one, and I call him one, in the startup community space, how to build startup communities anywhere. And so that's been his contribution to this space. And then our contribution has been on how to build inclusive startup communities.
Well, you've done splendidly. Let's go the whole road, 4 for 4.
Okay.
What 4 pieces of advice do you offer to our family listening right now, and why? And if it's advice that was given to you or that you gained through knowledge from someone else, please homage the author of that advice.
Absolutely. So, when I think about, and I'll keep this in a financial context, when I think about what does income creation, which leads to wealth creation, look like in this era that we are in, I think about my wife, Shantaria, really pushing me to leverage my contacts to create programs that would not just help other people, but that our children could also participate in. Even though these were adult programs, we encouraged and made it possible for our children to participate. And I believe every family should have a software engineer in its household, number one. Because if you have a software engineer, they're going to always be able to find work in this fourth industrial revolution. That's, number one. The second piece of advice is everyone must see themselves as an investor. Your first investment is yourself. The acquisition of knowledge, skills, taking care of this vessel that we have been entrusted with. But then from there, investing, and I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm not giving financial advice, but it doesn't make sense for us to live in communities where people are still having to do GoFundMes to bury people because they don't have life insurance and, they don't have burial just the simple stuff, right? That it's cute. Like, oh, we raised $15,000 for sister and them. I'm like, no, sister should have had a policy, right? And we could have used that money for something else. And so I think starting to look at investment broadly from an insurance perspective at all the different classes. But I really believe because of equity crowdfunding and because of the work that was done in the original Jobs Act 1.0 and the stuff that's on the table now for 2.0, there are several bills, Janice, that are working to improve upon the Jobs Act. And I have endorsed all of those bipartisan pieces of legislation. So number two, invest in startups at whatever level you can. You'll learn a lot and you might make some money too, but you definitely will keep some people employed, and that's important. The third thing is to develop your spiritual self and to know that everything that is required for you to fulfill your definitive purpose on this planet and beyond is already inside of you.
Wow.
It is
I
not
teach people to recite this every day.
Yes.
I have everything I need to be everything I need to be.
Incredible iteration. And so I think that level of respect for yourself and the opportunity to also believe that you're not existing alone. I think that's important, that there are forces, and in you, through you, that can get you through this thing we call life. And then the last thing is love, love, love. When the money doesn't matter, the acquisition of things is gone. The drive for that, when it's all said and done, people want to know that they are loved and that they loved. And so hopefully those 4 pieces of advice
Wow,
are helpful.
please, I'm taking your advice. Love, 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 love. And you know that I love you, Shantaria, OHUB, the community you're building that truly is global. We got to have part 2 of this conversation.
Let's do it.
There's so much that we didn't talk about, but wow, Dr. Rodney Sampson, what you did talk about has just lifted me out of my seat. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for the opportunity.
God bless.